Okay.
Good evening, listeners. This is Bill Bates. I'm filling in tonight for David Young, who's on family commitment duties. This is episode 29 in our series, and tonight's guest is John Hannan. Just before I move on to giving a little bit of detail on John, this is just a reminder that this is broadcast on Yes to a North Queensland State, but it's also fed to the Boot Brisbane Facebook page and YouTube channel. And you can look through any of the previous episodes on our website, bootbrisbane.com. Tonight's guest is John Hannan, as I said. I'll just give John a bit of an introduction. John moved to Cairns about 32 years ago to start work with the building of the International Airport in Cairns. John has a Bachelor of Science degree from the Sydney University, a Bachelor of Civil Engineering from the Sydney University, and a Master's of Engineering Science from the New South Wales University, and an unrestricted builder's licence in Queensland. He was formerly the chairman of the Development Industry Association, NDIA, chairman of the Building and Development Committee, Far North Queensland Catholic Diocese, and board member of the Calvary Hospital, which is now Ramsay Private Health Hospital. John started his career as a cadet engineer with the Commonwealth Departments of Work, then moved on to Thiess and Leighton groups, which is now Cimic, Australia's largest construction company. He worked and was trained by many of the engineers who worked on Thiess Brothers' Snowy Mountains hydroelectric scheme. So he had great mentors and obviously a lot of challenges put before him. Starting as an estimator, he worked his way up to construction manager of major projects and went on to become the state manager for WA. As I said, John came to Cairns about 32 years ago to work on the construction of the Cairns International Airport and founded his own construction and development company a few years later. So with no further ado, we'll pass over to John to give us a bit of brief, maybe just on your personal history as well, besides your, because I know you're quite a talented speaker in regards to rostrum, and so it'd be interesting to hear those sort of facets of your personality as well.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Bill. My introduction to engineering and my introduction to the Bradfield scheme came in 1965 when one of our high school teachers, who was a mechanical engineer, took us on a 2-week tour of the Snowy Mountains scheme. And at the end of that tour, the chief engineer told us that they were hoping that after they finished the Snowy Mountain scheme, they would move on to the Bradfield scheme, and described it in some detail. I had a connection, a further connection with the Snowy Mountains in the fact that my future wife, her father was the Shire engineer of Cooma during all that period where the Snowy Mountains Authority was based. So I had an initial grounding there, and the Commonwealth Department of Works put me through a rotation scheme through construction, design, civil, buildings, dams, water supply. So I had a good grounding in that before I did my master's degree, and then I joined Thiess Brothers, the old Thiess contractors, in the role of a small group which was designated as a think tank. Thinking outside the square was the sort of thing we did, and that's what I've loved ever since. Ideas that can change can change how successful a project is, ideas that can change a state or a city. Coming to Cairns, I've been a public speaker with rostrum for the last 5 years and enjoyed that. And I'm supposedly in retirement, but I think I'm busier now than I was when I was working. So that just about brings you up to date, I think.
All right, thank you. Just before we leave and go on to the Bradfield scheme, with the Cairns Airport, That was a fairly big initiative for Cairns area and a big boost to its economy. I think that was in the early mid-80s, that project. Is that right?
The initial international airport was in about 1984.
Yep.
This was the new international terminal and runways, and it was started in 1989 from memory. And that's the international terminal you see today, which has been since further expanded. And my counterpart at the Port Authority in those days was Bob Manning. So Bob Manning was head of the airport. So he and I worked closely on getting that project built.
And with that project, we went on to see it was a great benefit to Cairns and its entry into the international tourism market. It was sold some years ago, I think in about 2009, for about $550 million by the state government. Do you think we were shortchanged?
Well, originally it was a proposal for Cairns to own the whole airport, international and domestic, and I think it was a mistake. We never got to take that up. There are various reasons, but the airport's been sold, and yes, we perhaps got shortchanged.
Because I think New Zealand sold part of it recently. I think a 25% share for about $700 million. So obviously it's worth a lot more. And by the cost of the parking charges, I can see why they'd make a lot of money.
Yeah, that's right.
$29 a day.
Well, the government.
Okay,
all right, you're right. Keep going.
No, keep going. No, if you've got a comment there.
No, the government who sold the airport
Yep.
had previously said that they'd never sell the airport. And unfortunately, a lot of the money from the Port Authority doesn't all end up in Cairns. It ends up way back to Brisbane. And some of the things that were done with it was probably upgrading the M1 and things like that.
They did use some of it to refurbish our hospital, but I mean, nothing in regards to our hospital came out of the coffers of South East Queensland. That's for sure. We end up paying for the hospital upgrade ourselves by the sale of the airport, which was probably in hindsight, detrimental to Cairns. Anyway, we'll move on to the Bradfield scheme, and if you could give us a bit of rundown on that, please, John.
Okay, there are two proposals out there at the moment. The one that's probably most likely to get funding is one by the LNP, just announced recently. It's the LNP's plan to build Queensland's biggest ever drought-busting infrastructure project, the new Bradfield scheme. And it's been developed by two of Queensland's most respected knights of industry, Sir Leo Heischler and Sir Frank Moore. So Leo Heischler, from memory, was the head of the Treasury for years and years, and Sir Frank Moore was a noted tourism icon in Queensland. And they've taken it upon themselves to develop this plan, and it was inspired by the drought relief scheme proposed by Queensland engineer John Bradfield in 1938. The scheme that John Bradfield proposed, and John Bradfield was the civil engineer who looked after the design and the construction of the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the inner city railway line there called the City Circle. He also designed dams, the Burrinjuck Dam, the Warrenora Dam in Sydney, and the other one near Yass. And in 1932, after the Sydney Harbour Bridge was opened, Sir John Bradfield was then commissioned by the Queensland government to design a bridge which became the Story Bridge over the Brisbane River, which was opened in 1940. In 1938, John Bradfield proposed the Bradfield scheme, which was to irrigate Western Queensland using the floodwaters on the eastern side of the Great Dividing Range. The scheme that John Bradfield proposed in 1938 had involved lots of pumping, diverting water from the upper reaches of the Tully, the Herbert and the Burdekin rivers, required large pipes, tunnels, pumps and dams. Now, John Bradfield wasn't around to defend himself about criticism about that scheme, and he died in 1943 in the middle of the Second World War. And that scheme was then left on the back shelf as the Snowy Mountain scheme came to prominence. When that, it was a project after the Second World War in 1946, proposed and started with Sir William Hudson being appointed in 1949. And the Snowy Mountains is probably our biggest and most successful civil engineering project. And the main contractor from an Australian point of view was the old Thiess Brothers. And Thiess Brothers largely built that with salvaged equipment from World War II the Americans left around the Pacific Islands. And so that's how Thiess got involved. And when I worked at Thiess, or when I worked at the Commonwealth Department of Works, my mentor there was an ex-Snowy engineer, Peter Nowak. And when I went to Thiess, my mentors and my trainers there as engineers were mainly all ex-Snowy Mountains men. So I had a fantastic background of training from those particular people and heard all the stories about building dams and tunnels, etc., etc. So getting onto the new Bradfield scheme, it's designed to drought-proof Queensland and generating jobs for generations to come. It'll change the face of Queensland, but the only people proposing with a real proposal to build it at the moment are the LNP. The plan will use water from the largest dam ever built in Queensland, which is the Hells Gate Dam at 120 metres high, to create a food bowl on the western side of the Great Dividing Range. And as I said, while the original Bradfield scheme required expensive pumping to transfer water across the range, over the range, the new Bradfield scheme would use gravity to feed water from the Hells Gate Dam through tunnels beneath the range. This change will significantly increase the scheme's efficiency. So back in John Bradfield's day and back in my day as an engineer, a lot of the tunnelling we did was drill and blast. And we had platforms called jumbos to get to various levels of the thing. These days we have boring machines, which are much more efficient and much more controllable, and that is going to make a significant difference to this project. The existing Hells Gate Dam proposal is also backed by the federal government and would be the start of the new Bradfield scheme. And the Townsville, there's a Townsville group that is very much backing this and has put a lot of work into it.
I think it's one of Bob Catter's pet projects, isn't it?
I think so. I think he would love this to go. And I believe there's an offtake. There's an offtake at Charters Towers, which Bob has probably had a big hand in getting going there, which is going to be a boon for Charters Towers as well. So instead of consuming large volumes of electricity, the new Bradfield scheme would generate up to 2,000 megawatts of green energy through a series of hydroelectric plants. It will easily be the biggest hydroelectric scheme that this Queensland has ever seen, and potentially power up to 800,000 homes in Queensland. And just as a point of aside, during the February floods in North Queensland this year, the volume of water spilling over Burdekin Falls Dam would have filled Sydney Harbour in just 5 hours. In 5 hours. The water all went out to sea, but the new Bradfield scheme will capture North Queensland's water and use it to create jobs and secure the future of rural communities. Water from the scheme will also irrigate around 80,000 square kilometres of rich black soil plains south and west of Undan. And 80,000 square kilometres is 10,000 square kilometres bigger than the area of Tasmania. This scheme will then divert water into the Warrego River and the northern basin of the Murray-Darling system, where it will be reserved for use by southern Queensland farmers. This particular scheme, as the original scheme, has the ability to send water down into the Murray-Darling in New South Wales and irrigate parts of western New South Wales as well, and then into the Murray-Darling along that particular area, irrigating those areas as well. And another offshoot of it could have also diverted water into Lake Eyre. But at this stage, Queensland and the LNP are sticking to a plan to just take it as far as south as the Queensland border at this stage. I'm sure there'll probably be a proposal from the federal government or New South Wales government to extend it. But we'll see about that.
Yeah, as long as they pay for the water.
Exactly. But,
we can't provide all this benefit to them for nothing.
No. So
just before we go a little bit further, there's also a group in Townsville that's concerned about the cost of the project and what impact the revised Bradfield scheme going ahead will have in regards to funding and funding availability for other projects. Because as you'd be well aware, John, right throughout North Queensland and Central Queensland, there's always an issue with water. And I suppose a lot of people are a little bit fearful that the funding goes there and we'll never see Nalinga Dam, we'll never see development further up on the Mitchell or up Lakelands and things like that. And I mean, the people around Burdekin have been sort of waiting for a long time for the stage 2 of the Burdekin Dam, and that's probably one of the things that a lot of people sort of a little bit worried about is the diverting of funds away from everything else. Well, have you got an idea of the cost of the revised scheme?
The Hells Gate Dam is in the upper reaches of the Burdekin for a start. So I imagine the potential to divert water or to let excess water into the current Burdekin is there already before they go ahead and increase the size of the Burdekin. But yes, there will be a second dam on the Burdekin, and it's the Hells Gate Dam. I have some figures here it's called the Bradfield Party, and it was founded by a man called Matthew Spurgeon, who I haven't met yet, and the presenter was David Stockwell, PhD. And they have done their figures, which I haven't seen any checks or balances on, but the returns, the page called Returns Benchmarks, an internal rate of return for the scheme of 5 to 10%, supplied 2,000 gigalitres of North Queensland floodwater and up to 8,000 gigalitres. Capital expenditure, according to them, is $12.75 billion and a 5% finance charge. The LNP's proposal, I think, talks about a figure of $15 billion. The annual agricultural revenue based on this is between $1.4 billion on 0.2 to 0.4 million hectares. At a water cost of 10% of production, estimated fair price is $70 per megalitre, $300 per 2,000, $300 million per 2,000 gigalitres. I'm just trying to read this.
Yep.
Delivery price, $50 per megalitre operational. Full recovery, $250 per megalitre. 5% on 10 billion. Supply of water for the Murray-Darling Basin, mines and towns, and hydro power generation would provide additional revenue. A Murray-Darling Basin comparison. The Murray-Darling Basin produces 7.1 billion of produce each year from around 10,000 gigalitres of irrigation water on 1.6 million hectares. The Murray-Darling Basin, 22,000 gigalitres of storage. The Snowy Mountain Scheme providing 2,100 gigalitres of irrigation water. Leon Ashby estimates Queensland's annual potential, 21,000 gigalitres of irrigation in Queensland, will be twice the Murray-Darling Basin plan, and another 5,000 litres from the Burdekin Dam. Once developed, these systems could increase the national GDP by $20 billion per annum. The social benefits, construction output, 12.75 billion, 8.1 billion contributions to GRP. And Andrew, you might be able to tell me what the R is in GRP. I know GDP.
Regional.
And gross regional product. 2.4 billion in household income, 25,000 FTE jobs, drought proofing, regional stability and population growth. These areas will grow when this land becomes sustainable, a bit like the irrigation area around the MIA in southern New South Wales, the Murray irrigation area and the Murray-Darling area, where they have towns from Swan Hill to Mildura, and in the Murrumbidgee irrigation area, south of Wagga, they have towns in that area as well that are quite sustainable and well-developed towns.
A couple of weeks ago, we had David Landini on from the Riverina State Party, and he gave us a rundown on the irrigation system down there, and also the problems they're having with water, and a lot of the problems with water is been caused by the separation of water rights and land holdings.
Yes.
And which is sort of a bit of a sticking point with a lot of people, because we don't know who owns the water now. But he was basically saying all that land is very harsh land with it, and it's only the fact that the irrigation system came through that's allowed it to be a reasonable producer. Otherwise, it would be in terrible cycles of productivity and non-productivity. So water makes the difference.
We've got friends down there who are rice farmers down in that Riverina area, and I think they've had a really tough time over the last few years with water allocations, etc., etc. So I'll just continue finishing off this particular area.
Yep.
So the next thing is social benefits. It's going to be sustainable. It's going to be humane in terms of reduced drought and flood and stock losses. And it's going to be the opportunity to create what you were just talking about, an equitable water plan. The funding options could also include land grants, like the way the USA was developed alongside their railroads. And there are proposals for railroads to come up into this area. The value of irrigated land is around about 100 times that of resumed land. There's water sales, there's bond issues attractive at 5% in low interest environment. Mining royalties off balance sheet, no cost to taxpayer. So these are some things that are going to be investigated. At this stage, I am not a part of any group at this stage, but I've been told, and the only party who will develop this at this stage is the LNP, and I've been told by Sam Marino that if they win the election, that they would like me to join a group to be involved in getting this thing up and running, which I've said I'd be happy to look at. So keep going.
Just on time frames, like a lot of these things, it's envisaged that these projects will come to reality sometime in the future. I mean, one of the hardest things is just to get them off the ground in the first place and get the funding allocated to it, and then there's the build time. What's roughly the build? Say the LNP wins on next Saturday, and says, all right, we're going to make the arrangements to get the initial funding and then the progressive funding and that, and we'll make it a major project under that status that sort of clears the way for a lot of environmental sort of shortcuts.
Yep.
What sort of time scale would we take to sort of get it sort of at least part operational to finish?
I'll answer that by just going back to the Snowy scheme.
Yep.
The Snowy scheme was commenced in 1945. When I went there with school in 1965, I asked them about applying for a cadetship to go on and join the Snowy. I applied for a cadetship there in 1967, so 18 years after commencement, and they told me that they had just closed off cadetships, and I believe the Snowy was probably finished late 60s, so probably about 20 years. I believe the Burdekin, the Bradfield scheme, I've seen figures around about 10 years, and I believe that's probably right. But we're looking at something that, if done correctly, will be 100 years plus or longer, depending on changes in weather environment for our our wet seasons, which are actually at this stage, according to all forecasts, planned to get wetter if we believe what the climate scientists are telling us. So I think 10 years is a reasonable time. But in that time, a lot of other infrastructure around these towns and cities and potential for other businesses and railroads and all sorts of things is going to be looked at as well.
Okay, then. Just on that, I suppose I'm just taking up the cudgel a little bit for the people down in the Burdekin who've been waiting since the 80s for stage 2 of their dam. That dam raising what it basically does is raises the wall 14 metres plus puts in a set of floodgates. Yep. The one big advantage of the floodgates and the extra 14 metres is some sort of control over that mad river come the wet season. Yep. To sort of cut down the flow into the ocean and hence the sediment into the Pacific. We can sit there and we can argue, and I'll argue Peter Reid's case that, well, there's actually no sediment on the reef itself, but that's another issue altogether. But that project, the Burdekin,
Yep.
I think there's nothing to do. I mean, the land's already been reserved, yep. And the cost of the project would be about 1 to 1.5 billion. Yep. And probably 2 to 3 years to complete from there. And I suppose the thing is they've been waiting on that for 20 odd years. They're probably a bit grumpy that the Bradfield scheme might get a Guernsey before them.
If I'm appointed to the committee to look at the Bradfield scheme, I'll also be pushing very hard that at the same time, because it's much more cost effective, that the raising of the existing Burdekin dam wall is done at the same time. In fact, it could actually be, along with Burdekin, along with the Falls Dam, it could be the first cab off the rank, in my opinion.
I think also that what that does is sort of give us a good system of controlling the water a little bit better, getting a bit more hydro out of it between river flow and pumped hydro on the Burdekin. So I think that's capable. The pump and the river flow hydro is capable of producing 1.5 gigawatts as well, which is it's not insignificant by any means of the case. And it also, the additional water, I think, would be provided down to the Burdekin itself. The new lands down there would probably irrigate somewhere near, I think they were saying, I don't know, I might be wrong, 400,000 hectares. Right. I think there's 100,000 under now, hectares under irrigation, but they reckon there's potential for another 400,000 hectares. But don't quote me on that. And it will also lower the price of water for them, which would be a great boon to any farmer.
What all of this does for your cause, Bill and Andrew, is it makes the case in years to come for a North Queensland state much, much stronger and as a state much more viable, just from this one project alone, apart from some of the other things I'm going to talk about tonight.
Well, that's one of the most important things, being a viable state, not a mendicant state like Tasmania, and to a lesser extent even South Australia. Sometimes I sort of scoff. I mean, I looked at some figures we'll probably go into a little bit later when you talk about the hydrogen project, but I'll give you a little bit of insight in regards to Tasmania's and South Australia's electricity consumption, and just goes to show you how pitiful their economies are. But we'll save that to you. But that will save that to your talk on the hydrogen project.
So just finishing off on this, the LNP's estimate is that tens of thousands of jobs will be created through the construction of the new Bradfield scheme and the expansion of high-value agriculture. And the future of Queensland's regional communities will be secured for good by capitalising on Asia's abundant demand for food. So, as some of the other parts I'm going to talk about, North Queensland, and especially with its air transport and its connection links to Asia, does have the capacity to become the food bowl of Asia. We've seen already with the airport at Toowoomba what a great success that is, and we're another 1,700 kilometres north of that. So I think this can only be a plus and a win for North Queensland and a win for a future North Queensland state.
Okay. Just before we leave the dams and that, I'm probably a little bit more confident if people like yourself have got input and your fellow engineers into these new dams, because after the last fiasco with the Paradise Dam, I hope none of those people are involved in building dams up here.
No, Emily, hopefully not.
I mean, that was. Have you ever heard of a dam built like that with that layered cement and earth construction?
No, I'm aware of them. I mean, the original dams, like the Warragamba Dam and the dams in Sydney, around the Sydney area where I was raised, they're all concrete dams.
Yeah.
The latter dams, such as one I was involved in Canberra, the Googong Dam, which the three dams in Canberra before that were the Cotter and the two dams upstream from that. They're all, one of them might have been, from memory, earth and rock, but the Cotter was definitely concrete. And but the Googong Dam was an earth and rock fill dam, and the one I was involved in Victoria, the Thompson Dam, was an earth and rock fill dam with a 600-foot high spillway and a 300 foot or 300 metre, I can't remember now, it's too long ago, about 40 years ago, a massive intake towers, and it's now Melbourne's main water supply. And my main thesis, particular area of interest at university, was soil mechanics and rock mechanics. So I did a lot to do with earth and rock fill dams, mainly in those days.
Yeah, just going on with the Paradise Dam for a sec, because it's fairly interesting just talking about dams. But that construction was an earth-based dam with concrete and aggregate. And what it was, from my understanding, it was that mix was completely put on and then basically compressed with rollers and that. And the idea was that layer after layer with the cement mix in it would bind and keep building and it be uniform strength. But I gather from talking to someone down there, what happened is they must have went on a long weekend some stage, and when they came back to do the next layer, it never bound properly. So what's happened is it's actually shearing laterally.
Yeah.
In these layers, and although I think the government's answer is to reduce the wall to next to nothing, so they've basically got no water. But I was talking to someone. There is another option if they want to do it, is actually drill down through the dam down to the bedrock and put concrete and steel pylons in there to lock the layers together and keep it fast. But that'll be a conversation with someone, an expert down there in coming months, because I think it's going to be a big issue as it gets closer and closer to some action on that Paradise Dam. But yes, John, we'd like to move us over to the West Coast now.
All right, just before we finish, I believe that the Paradise Dam is what's called a rolled concrete dam.
That's it. Yeah.
And techniques that have been used to raise dams, particularly concrete dams in the past, are drilling rods through the existing dams and into the existing rock and post-tensioning the new layers of concrete that go on top of those. So that's a technique that's been used successfully. But there's all sorts of ways to raise dam and to repair dams as well, but we won't go into that at the moment.
No, that's another conversation with someone down south.
Okay. All right, so where do you want to go now, Bill?
Well, we'll move to the west to my home state.
Right. Well, what's happening in your home state can be duplicated here in Queensland and through the rest of Australia. So what's happening in your home state right at the moment is a technique developed by the CSIRO a couple of years ago to produce safe hydrogen. And hydrogen will potentially become the main source of power that will replace oil and gas in the next 10, 20, 30 years. We've just heard that the three major economies of Asia, namely China, South Korea, and just this week, I believe, Japan, are all going to go carbon neutral by 2050, and maybe China is 2060. That means that even though Japan has one of the most efficient coal-fired power stations, using all sorts of techniques to reduce emissions from coal-fired power stations, they're going to have to scrap that in years to come. They're even going to have to scrap LNG exports from Australia, which have been one of our major sources of revenue from the northwest, West Cape, Woodside, etc., and now from Queensland. So what's coming to replace it, and where Australia may lead the world in replacing oil and gas, is in hydrogen power. The world's largest energy project at the moment is starting to commence, has just had major project status from the federal government, just north of the Pilbara. It's over an area of 6,500 square kilometres of desert land north of the Pilbara, has an initial target price of 35 billion. So I think our all-up cost of 12.5 to 15 billion is a drop in the ocean compared to this. And it's next to the coast, and they're going to use wind and solar to desalinate water, and then from that desalinated water, they're going to use electrolysis to break that water down into, as we know, water is H2O, hydrogen oxygen, in its components of hydrogen oxygen. They're going to then add nitrogen to the hydrogen to make the hydrogen safe into an ammonia. You may have all heard of the Hindenburg disaster in the 1936-37.
Yes.
Which blew up, and we've all seen probably pictures of it on TV over the years. This ammonia is converted into ships, even standard sort of ships at the moment. And places like Japan and particularly Germany are interested now. Germany is even talking about building the ships for this gas, this ammonia, to transport it to Germany, because Germany has a big problem with Russia. At the moment, Germany is very dependent on Russian gas, for its energy. They see Australia, as does Japan and probably South Korea, as the answer to their energy supplies, and they're going carbon neutral in the next 30 years. So there's 1,600 of the world's largest wind turbines involved, and Australia is a leader in wind turbines. 78 square metres of solar panels. So 78 square metres of solar panels, and again we're a leader in this for...
Square kilometres.
Square kilometres, sorry, square kilometres.
Square metres, I got that much on my roof.
78 square kilometres of solar panels, and they are going to hopefully replace the 3 billion litres of diesel that the Pilbara iron ore mines currently import to power up their mines. So that's 3 billion litres of imported diesel from overseas, presumably the Saudis and those sort of countries, will then be right on their doorstep. And the transition period to green hydrogen is happening faster than they thought. They thought maybe 15 to 20 years, but it could be 10 years or less. We all know about battery cars, but the car industry is now looking seriously at hydrogen as the clean source of energy for their cars. There are proposals to have hydrogen filling stations throughout the country, just in proposal form, but serious money is looking at this. There are proposals for hydrogen to be the first non-fossil fuel to power air transport. Air transport currently accounts for about 3.5% of greenhouse gases in the world. So this is on the horizon, and it's Australia's. It's Australia from CSIRO. It's us who are doing this. And I believe that we will become the world leader in this, and it's potential to make Australia one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Australia at the moment is a leader in iron ore. I believe the largest iron ore deposits in the world, with potential to last hundreds of years. Same with coal, if we ever find out how to do carbon capture and storage correctly. I think we've just overtaken China as the largest gold producer. Along with China, we are the largest rare earth supplier in the world, potential for rare earths. And America has just signed deals with a couple of Australian companies to give them security of rare earth supplies and not have to rely on China. We have some of the largest gas reserves, if not the largest in the world, and yet we have the largest unused land mass. I believe we have the potential to develop all of Australia eventually. What is also coming down the pipeline, and the first testing through a French reactor will be in about 5 or 7 years, and that's the first trials of nuclear fusion on a large-scale basis. It is said that it'll get there, but it may not take place till 2050. Funnily enough, the time when the world is talking about going carbon neutral, the biggest economies in the world. But nuclear fusion also offers us the potential to, from a civil engineering point of view, to develop massive dams and massive channels on a much simpler and easier basis. But that's something for future tense, something in the future. But this country, with 25 million people, my point is, we have to develop this country, or people will develop it for us. With 25.5 million people in an area not that dissimilar to the United States, which has 330 million people, we have to develop this country and we have to get this wealth into this country. Otherwise, my contention is we won't hold on to this country, especially if America weakens and is not our ally as we have been in the past. So my thesis is that we are potentially the richest country in the world. In the next 10 to 15 years, if we play our hand correctly, we can be on the path to becoming the richest country in the world with our iron ore, coal, gas, gold, rare earths. Rare earths are things like lithium that are the future of sustainable batteries for people like Tesla cars, etc., etc. And rare earths, evidently, I'm not 100% sure on this, can also be taken out of salt. So the salt that we take to desalinate the water on the Pilbara coast to develop our hydrogen can also be have lots of minerals in it. It can be extracted, so the salt is not going to go to waste. There's also molten solar technology that is being developed. The average price per kilowatt hour of energy in Australia is around about 21.3 cents per kilowatt hour from memory. The price of molten solar energy per kilowatt hour reduces to about 6 or 7 cents Australian, around about 5 or 7 cents American. But in Australian terms, there's a plant in Chile that's proposed that's going to get it down to about 5 cents US. That. So these technologies are all there, and they have the capacity to halve and potentially quarter energy costs as we know them at the moment. So with water, energy and minerals, we do have the potential, if we play our hand right, to become the wealthiest country in the world. And that's a very big statement for somebody in the year 2020, but somebody who follows this a great deal as to what Australia has the potential to become.
Okay, then, if we can just go back to the hydrogen scheme in regards to that wind and solar farm, I think it's estimated to be about 26 gigawatts of electricity production. Now, right, to give people a bit of an idea, at 6:35 this afternoon, the total generation on the east coast, or demand for power on the east coast of Australia, was 24 gigawatts.
And so how much was that Pilbara one, Bill?
26.
26. Okay, yeah.
So you get the general idea that it is basically the whole Eastern Australian power grid worth of electricity. I mean, we with high demand, like in summer, I think we can crank out about 32, 33 gigawatts out of all our systems. So that's the sort of massive generation you're talking about over there. So that just gives people a little bit of perspective. And the other thing I just wanted to touch on is the mendicant states of South Australia and Tasmania. I mean, their demand was just over about 1.2 gigawatts each. And that's a measure of their economy compared to Victoria was around about 5 gigawatts. I think New South Wales around about the 8, and Queensland about the 8. So that gives you the scale of the economies in the different states of Australia. And like I say, North Queensland and Central Queensland together, we definitely can be a powerhouse and sort of dwarf South Australia and Tasmania in their economies.
Exactly.
Just another thing. Well, do you know anything? I understand, like ammonia is what is it? H3N is the compound. Three hydrogen, one nitrogen. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. NH3. Yeah.
Yeah,
NH.
right. So I presume we just got to draw the nitrogen out of the atmosphere to mix to make the ammonia. Would that be reasonable, or where?
Yeah, I believe nitrogen is one of the most.
70% of the atmosphere
is nitrogen. That's correct.
Yeah.
So
I presume we must have a technique just to get it straight out of the atmosphere, because I can't imagine finding nitrogen, put it in a bottle, compressing it, and transporting it up there. So there must be some technique.
I'm sure there is, Bill. I haven't really gone into that one, but I'm sure there are plenty of chemists who have converted nitrogen and hydrogen, have taken nitrogen out of the atmosphere to make ammonia.
Yeah. And it's not only just energy. I mean, the other part of the equation with ammonia is fertilizer. I mean, if you're converting it to ammonia here and sending it over, and they're extracting the hydrogen for energy, that leaves them with the nitrogen to pump into different fertilizers and that. So it's a twofold really investment in regards to A, you're supplying energy, and B, you're supplying the world with fertilizer. Probably the greatest volume of fertilizer in the world. But there again, they always thought Australia was full of bullshit.
What they're talking about replacing, the sort of things they're talking about replacing oil and gas are industry, agriculture, transport, air travel, shipping, etc., etc. So we're talking about a revolution where Australia is the potential leader. And you can read up more and more about this. And one of the men who was on Radio National the other day was Alex Hewitt from CWP Renewables, who has a 40% interest in this project in the Pilbara. So just replacing 3 billion litres of diesel in one little area of Australia just gives you an idea of the scale of what we're talking about.
Just on that, there's one other aspect, I suppose, as I've never been a great lover of renewables, mainly because in our system they're asynchronous and sort of give our grid a hell of a lot of pain. But the hydrogen system, can alleviate that.
Yeah.
But one of the things that sort of all the proponents for new renewable energy, solar and wind, one of the things that they never talk about is this disposal. Now, solar panels and wind turbines are only got an 18 to 20 year life of type, and then they're basically, you have to replace the whole lot. It poses a major problem in the future. Do you know if there's anything in the wind in regards to safe disposal of solar products and the wind turbines and that? Because I know in America they're actually decommissioning a number of old sites in the sort of north Midwest of the United States, in sort of I think it's Nebraska and places like that, where they're a pretty windy place. And they've actually found that they have to actually send the turbine blades into landfill. They originally thought they could grind them up and reuse them. They found that that's not possible on an economic scale, because the resin the resin in those blades and the fiberglass and all the resin of different products, it's monstrously hard, and it's there was they thought they could cut them up and ship them somewhere and it'd be ground up into something reusable, road base or something, but that's not going to happen. So that's a problem the renewables industry is faced with. And then again, with the turbines themselves, the internals of a turbine do have a lot of heavy metals. And then again, with the solar panels, I mean, it's laborious work to break down a solar panel to separate the glass, the aluminium, and then get the film, which is bonded usually onto a composite sheet. Yeah. And you can't just throw that in a landfill. I mean, you can, but I'm going to tell you what, you got to find some awful problems in later on with the leaching of the thing. So do you think that's one thing that should be looked at the same time, is how we're going to actually dispose of those renewables that we've got at the moment? And especially, I think we're now coming to, renewables started off under Kevin Rudd, the big push in that. So that was 2007, say 2010. So we're 10 years into it. We're probably another 10 years. We've got 10 years to get ourselves organised for the first wave of major disposals and that. Is that something that should be looked at the same time to make sure we've got a handle on all this? Definitely. Because we don't want Australia to become the big dumping ground of we don't know what to do with this stuff.
No, I totally agree with you, Bill. I think it should be. And I think that I'm sure people are looking at it. Can I talk to you about, just because we're running out of time, just quickly talk to you about molten salt, and how with solar at the moment you still need batteries, solar panels as we know it. But molten salt 24-hour solar energy from molten salt makes it possible, and prices are falling fast. So I might just quickly read this thing to you. There's a 640-foot cement tower rising from the flat, empty Nevada desert around halfway point on the highway between Reno to Las Vegas.
It's
the tower surrounded by nearly 2-mile wide field of mirrors that send shimmering beams of light into the sky. What people are actually seeing is a 110 megawatt concentrated solar power plant built and operated by Solar Reserve of Santa Monica, California. It's not from outer space, but there's not yet anything quite like it of this size anywhere else on the planet. Solar Reserve is trying to prove that the technology that drives crescent dunes can make solar power an affordable, carbon-free day and night energy source dispatched on the electric grid like any fossil fuel plant. Here, concentrated sunlight heats molten salt to 1050 degrees Fahrenheit in that shimmering tower. Then the salt gets stored in a giant insulated tank and can be tapped into to make steam to run a turbine. So back to running turbines, similar to what we did in the Snowy. If this plant and similar facilities under construction or seen to be proved reliable, the technology is poised to take off. Solar voltaic panels can displace fossil fuels during the day, and wind turbines can do the same as long as it's windy. But molten salt towers may be able to meet the challenge of electricity on demand and push more older, dirtier fossil fuel plants into retirement. We're going to see many more CSP molten salt towers, Program Manager for CSP said. So that's being developed now, and the one at Crescent Dunes in Nevada has a current dated price in 2009, 13.5 cents a kilowatt hour. The one in Morocco, 15 cents. The proposed one for South Australia, which hasn't been funded yet, was 6 cents per kilowatt hour. This is US. And the one in Chile was 5 cents a kilowatt hour. So they're probably adding 1.5 to them, about 7.5 cents. And we're currently paying around about 21.3 cents a kilowatt hour in Queensland. So this is the sort of stuff that's coming. It's going to change whether people are devoted to fossil fuels or not. Money is going to go to these things. That's where money is going to transition to. Big money is going to follow these renewables, and that's what the future is going to be.
Well, so, is that installation you're talking about Ivanpah?
Is what?
IVANPAH. Ivanpah is the plant in the Mojave Desert. It's been there for a while.
It's called Crescent Dunes in Tonopah, Nevada.
Okay.
Developers Solar Reserve, 110 megawatts operating capacity. Okay,
that's a new one. I'll have to have a look at that. But Ivanpah was obviously the predecessor, running 3 thermal power plants over 3,500 acres of land, public land in the southwest United States.
Yep.
It was planned to produce 440 megawatts, which is next to nothing in the scheme of things, and that's been an unmitigated disaster because what they found, the molten, because this is probably one of the earlier ones, they actually had to fire up their plants with generators to keep the molten salt from solidifying, because overnight the desert temperatures get down to below zero at times, and that takes a major effect on the molten salt. So they actually found out they had to run the generators a lot longer than they thought to keep the salt molten. But I presume they should have learnt a lot from those initial runs, and we'll just have to see how it develops.
Well, places like Darwin and ourselves up in the tropics, we shouldn't have that problem.
Yeah, because it never gets cold at night.
Not cold enough, no.
Yeah, no, but it does get freezing in the Mojave Desert.
Have you heard about talk about a reigniting of a space station for far north Queensland? The one that was proposed here almost 30 years ago, but on a smaller scale.
I've heard something that come out of Brisbane by a couple of sort of local minor players talking about space station that. But the big advantage with Queensland, especially North Queensland, the closer you get to the equator to launch a space vehicle, the less the speed's required for exit speed. So there's a huge saving in power requirements, or you forget to keep the power requirements, well, then you've got a much bigger payload delivery the closer you get to the equator. So I think that was one of the thoughts in going back about 30 years ago when they first talking about it, is the fact to get it right up on the Cape, so it could take advantage of that. But I think maybe it was overtaken with fear of cyclones and other events that might have been a bit harmful. But let's face it, the number of cyclones and your preparedness for them is sort of pretty good these days. You can sort of make provisions for that.
I believe there is something in the wind right at the moment, which is again another feather in your cap for your North Queensland state. And I believe we'll hear more about it in the coming months.
Ah, very good. There's nothing like good news.
Okay, it's all heading our way.
Okay, then look, we've just gone over the hour. It's probably time to wrap it up. I'd like to thank you very much for coming on, John. In coming weeks or months, we're going to change over to a Zoomcast format, and we'd like you to come back and be on with other guests at the same time on similar sort of subjects and that. And that's something we've got to plan in the future. So because the podcast system makes it fairly hard to have multiple guests on at the same time, because you can't see and see the gestures in regard when they're ready to talk or not. Where the Zoomcast gives us that option to bring on complimentary guests, because I'd like, say in coming weeks, have you back. Yep. And also with Tony Manning from down in Townsville. He's another civil engineer, and you can talk the pros and cons and things on that with the Burdekin Dam and Hell's Gate and those sort of things, and it provides us, and maybe other topics as well. But no, thank you very much for your participation tonight. It was most welcome, and I hope all our listeners enjoy it. And I'll just remind our listeners now, if you want to listen to this again, you can go to our YouTube page, YouTube channel, by going to our webpage and clicking on the YouTube icon, or go to Facebook pages, bootbrisbane.com or Yes to a North Queensland State. Thank you for this evening, and if you're looking for any other information in regards to a new state of North Queensland, also visit our website, and there's contact numbers there to contact myself for any other particular information. So thank you, John, once again, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.